We're probably going to try to shoot for a little after 2 o'clock. What I want to normally target is good 3 or 4 hours because we don't have this kind of meeting very often. And the amount of things that I have on my heart to talk to you about, and I hope that you have to talk about, questions you might have or things you might want to bring up, are things that if we're only talking every month or two like this, we're going to need time. It's not something we can do in a short meeting. I think what we're going to need to do is set a set date for our next meeting in each meeting so that we don't have the chaos of, I've been playing it by ear because our schedules keep changing, but we're just going to have to go with what we've got each time. That's one of the benefits of recording. I have had quite a few ministers that we work with and other assemblies as well who are either pastors or whose pastors encouraged them, which I appreciate, to connect us, who have asked if they could join us at times by Zoom. We haven't done that yet. The only Zoom meetings I have been having are with ministers overseas, which some of you got to be on one of those, which is pretty eye-opening when you realize just how big the work is, how much is going on. I don't know how many hundreds of ministers are in that meeting. Mm-hmm. It was pretty astonishing to watch. There's another major Bible study in the southern area. It covers some of South America as well as some of the ministers asked if I would do possibly the end of next month. So if we do that and we have a Zoom meeting like that, any of you are welcome to join. I usually do it in here. If you think I go a long time. I don't know how long we were here that day. It might have been 6 hours. A few of you that were coming through, and I said, hey, if you're here, you must stay. I didn't know if they knew what they were in for. But that's a blessing that they would want to be connected to us. Those are precious things. So we've got a lot going on. They wanted to make a connection more directly with our assembly. That's been going on a lot behind the scenes that I haven't been talking about because we don't want to exalt our gate. You know what it means to exalt your gate? Somebody tell me what it means.
It means losing your gate.
Well, that will be the result eventually. That's where you're tooting your own horn. Mm-hmm. You're putting spotlight on yourself. We don't really need to send out an advertisement. We've got a big enough spotlight. But if the Lord feels that we're worthy of that, then I hope we can live up to it. That's a lot of what we'll be talking about today. But the Lord feels like we're capable of sustaining that, then God help us to have all those things we need to do it, the right convictions and courage and all those things, commitments. But we don't need to advertise. So a lot of things are going on behind the scenes. Once in a while, I'll tell Brother Chappell some things, or one of you if I'm talking to you on the side. But if I were to advertise what's going on, someone would probably think I'd lost my mind. They wouldn't understand unless, like I said, you're one of the couple of brothers that were here that sat in that meeting and saw how many ministers are out there that we're working with in different ways. It's a blessing that God's working the way He is. It's going to be up to us. You notice I didn't say me. That'd be a foolish thing to say. It's going to be up to us to sustain it, because what will sustain this work will be the amount of investment we give and the type of spirit we have and the type of integrity we have. We can keep our integrity. I'm going to go into some things on that, I think, later. I've got a number of things on my mind. Of course, we always are spirit-led, but a meeting like this, you ought to have some things on your mind, and I do. There's some characteristics we absolutely have to have if we're going to succeed in the ministry, in any level of the ministry, whether you're in a pastoral position like Brother Chappell, or whether you're in an assisting pastoral position, or some of these other offices of the ministry that I think we're going to be seeing a little more clearly in the days ahead. We need to. We need to see them a little more clearly. And I don't just mean see them and say, there's one right there. I mean, we need to recognize when they're present. And I don't mean by naming them and claiming them, which some have thought that's how it worked, that you had to declare what you are. You don't have to declare what you are. God will do that. God will declare what you are. And it'll be obvious to anybody watching whether somebody is an apostle or teacher or prophet or evangelist or a pastor for that matter. God can make that obviously clear. You can see it. You should see it. If you see certain qualities in a life of an individual, I'm beating around the bush to get started, but these are kind of some of the things I want to talk about. I don't know that we'll talk about it today, but one of the things I really feel would be beneficial for us is to go through the 5 offices of the ministry and talk about them. Not just what they are, not just what the Bible tells us about them, that for certain, but also what does it look like? And if you have a calling on your life, I had more questions than you'd imagine at this camp meeting from people that came up to me and were asking me about this very thing. They're like, I feel this on my life. And some of these were already pastors. They said, I feel this pull. How do I know what the Lord's trying to tell me? I had a lot of those kind of conversations, which I appreciated, though they're difficult because I can't speak for the Lord. So you have to learn to watch the signs. There's signs of an apostle. There's signs of any office of the ministry. When you're watching somebody and you see if that is the type of responsibilities they have, if that's the type of character they have, if that's the type of spirit they have, clearly you can see what kind of an office they have. And it has to do with what pulls you the strongest. One of the things I've always deeply appreciated about you, Brother Chappell, is you absolutely have a pastoral calling. There's no question about that. You can see by the things that matter most to him. Visiting the people, caring for the people, studying the kind of things that are extremely practical and counsel-driven type of subjects, where a lot of ministers don't have that level of passion for those things. They might appreciate them, they might know they need to know more about it, but it's not their highest hunger. A pastor's going to have that as their highest hunger. The people are going to be their highest priority in terms of caring for the people and taking care of their needs in all the different ways that is required. And so at some point, I want to get into talking about those offices, and I want you praying as we do. If the Lord's got a calling on your life, so many times through the years in our history, we've focused on pastors and sometimes even use the word minister for pastors when that's not at all biblical. We'd say the ministers' meeting is happening when you meant pastors' meeting, really, because that's who we're going to be sitting at the tables and so on. We're pastors. But there's a lot more than pastors in the ministry. Pastors, in the type of way pastors have filled that role historically, have gotten more attention. They've had more authority. But it's important for us to understand and not just have some general feeling. I have a feeling that the Lord wants to use me. Use you to do what? You need to know that. It can be one of the most frustrating things of all for someone that has a calling to the ministry to feel that call to do something, and you're like, what is it you want? Sometimes that's what God wants you. He wants you in that position, so you keep asking him, tell me, Lord, until he knows you really want to know bad enough, he'll tell you, or he'll show you, but you need to know what your calling is. As I said, a lot of times we focus so heavily on pastors because pastors seem to have certain privileges that other offices don't, at least in the modern structure. The pastor is the one who usually lives at the church or has some support from the church financially and otherwise. I'm talking about in the modern structure. Pastor is the one who has the authority in the church, making the decisions and things. And so somebody that feels a calling to leadership is probably going to be drawn to that kind of position. They're going to feel like I can do this as something that I can do full time. But that's not the only office of the ministry. Every office is needed. And we need to recognize there's even a difference. I know it's a bit controversial. It shouldn't be. Not if you studied the Bible. And I'm not going to talk much on this because I've talked on it in the past, but there's a difference between what the scripture calls a bishop, that's how the King James translators translate it at least, overseer, if you want to translate it a little more accurately, and a pastor. Not every pastor is an overseer. So that's something I think we miss sometimes. We think of pastors like, well, the pastor of the church is, and what you mean is the overseer is. But there could be more than one pastor in a church if you have someone working in the office of a pastor, and then you have the one who may be a pastor, but he's the overseer. So we need to be thinking about all that, but I'm giving you some groundwork for next time, and then I'll get into the meat of what I have on my mind in a moment. But part of the groundwork I want you working on, since I'm sure we won't be able to cover it today, is I want to start getting into these offices, and I want you on your own to study them out. We did put out some material on them several years ago. I think it was maybe the third series we went through on the ministry on the podcast. If you go back to, I think we ended up calling that the True Ministry. It originally was Messages of the Ministry, or Messages for Ministers, or to the Ministry or something. But if you go back to those, we did go through them. So if you want a bunch of that information to get started, you go back there. But if we get into this, I may go into more depth than that, because we're going to need to start recognizing what would it look like today if it was present, one of those offices. What are we expecting? Most of the time in Christianity, and this is why we tend to go to extremes, we go to the other extreme. And our body has been known for this. It's not a critique. This is actually a good thing on some level if you don't go too far with it. But we've often corrected what we saw as incorrect extremes. So, for example, there's all kinds of people roaming the earth calling themselves apostles right now, who are clearly not apostles at the level of the apostles in the New Testament. To get you started on the issue of an apostle, I think there are different levels of apostles, first of all. But I'd be very careful, whatever level you think you're at, to be calling yourself that, especially just naming yourself one. Like I said, you should be able to look at the weight a person has. You should be able to look at the scale of their effect. I'll tell you one of the things you're going to see in an apostle when we get to talking about that. You're going to see somebody who has a range that is massive. They touch a lot of things, and they've got a lot of weight in their words. And you can start looking at some other things like that. But I've seen people that have a couple of hundred people in a church somewhere, and they're calling themselves an apostle. I think that's a little bit dangerous. So we've corrected that. But sometimes when we correct things, we overcorrect. And we go so far to the other side that we have this idea about some of these offices that if we're not careful, we'll never see them. They could be right in front of you and you won't see them because you're expecting something that isn't really biblical. I always, when I was growing up, people talked about one day we'll have the office of a teacher present. I thought, well, how would I know it? You know what I was thinking back then as a young person, child? I said, how will I know that? Not for myself. I didn't ever think I was going to teach. I was too shy for that. But I thought if I was looking for one, how would I know someone has the office of a teacher? And in my mind, I think a lot of people in our body feel this way. Well, no, maybe not. A lot of people in some parts of our body feel this way. In my mind, I thought, well, if somebody's at the office of a teacher, they'll never be wrong on anything. They'll know every verse in the Bible. They'll know every doctrine because that's what it would have to be the office of a teacher. So they must not have had any in the early church. They were debating over things, you know. They disagreed on things, which means it cannot possibly mean the person is flawless in their teaching, that they never make a mistake or they understand every mystery. So then we have to start thinking, what does it really look like? Because we could be looking for something we're never going to find because we're looking for something that's higher than even anything God intends on this side of the marriage supper. On the other side of the marriage supper, you'll see flawless individuals. That's when the sevenfold light will exist. That's some just to get you started. But I want to quickly go through what I want to do with the structure of these meetings. We're going to follow the Spirit in all of it, as we always do, but there are some things I want to cover each time we have one of these meetings. And I don't have anything to discuss on this today, but I do want to discuss any critical issues we might have, things we're facing, things we need to be aware of, things we might need to deal with that relate to you all who are in leadership. We don't today. The biggest thing I'm worried about in terms of leadership level issues today in our assembly is, I don't want to use this word too strongly because it could get taken out of context, but I want to see our newer men who have a pastoral or a ministerial type of a background get more assimilated. When I see certain things, it gives me great hope. Brother, giving me that kind of hope, Brother Jerome. He wants to sit down. He wants to spend time getting into the Bible. He wants to know why we do things the way we do. And when somebody is pulling on me like that, despite the fact that, and this isn't a complaint, but despite the fact that I am going pretty much morning to night, they're going to get some of my attention. If you're needing me, and it's somebody that if I help you, you can grow, whatever I have to sacrifice, I'll give that attention. That's an area of concern that we want to make sure nobody's falling by the wayside. It's true of any of our newer people, but newer ministers, we want to make sure they're not falling by the wayside. Sometimes a newer minister can come and they're so used to being the principal speaker in a church, or they're so used to being really involved in the services that it could feel smothering to them not to have that amount of room here. And that's going to take some maturity. To stick in those situations will take some maturity because you've got to realize I'm not just here to do something, I'm here to get something. I do believe what we have is a teaching hospital. This isn't just a hospital. This is a teaching hospital. This is where we are developing and teaching doctors to be doctors, ministers to be ministers. And that's a different environment. You do have to exercise, and every opportunity you get, you should exercise. It's why many times I don't just call on somebody to do certain things. I'll say, somebody do this. It's because I want you to not depend on me to tell you when I'm feeling the Spirit. If I feel it, I'll let you know, and I'll tell you I want you to do such and such. But I want you to be sensitive enough to the Spirit so that you feel that pull, that tug. And you know when the Lord's talking to you, when he's put something on your heart or wants you to say or do something in terms of what's going on in the service. But that is a challenge. I wasn't going to wade into any of our challenges other than perhaps that. That's a good example of one. That's a challenge, is that you're going to have two potential problems when you have ministers come who have pastored assemblies, have been responsible for people. I'm not talking about ministers from the body, because normally people that come from among our churches, most of them have learned enough ministerial etiquette that they're not coming into the church trying to take a certain role. They understand how order works, and so they may get a role because they deserve it, they merit it, but they're not coming in trying to push into somewhere. That's just not our ministerial etiquette. None of us push in. I wouldn't go to someone else's church, even if they wanted me to come and speak. I'm not going to get in there and push in. They're going to have to ask me and so on. But sometimes if somebody isn't from that kind of a background, sometimes people can come looking for opportunities. And I don't just mean opportunities in the local church. I mean opportunities to take from the local church. And so we have to be aware of all those things. And it isn't something I like discussing. It isn't something I want to discuss. But anytime somebody is here that we don't know, we always have to be aware of that and be careful. Be careful with them in terms of don't offend them and hurt them on the gentle side of it. But you also do have to guard, because we don't know what everybody's background is. Generally, people that I have on the platform that I would have pray with the people and other things are folks that I know enough about. I've felt out their spirit that I feel comfortable with that. But every person that comes in our assembly is not going to be on the same level, and they're not going to have the same motives. So we, who are part of the leadership of these churches, we have to be on guard. You've had it happen, I know, a few times, Brother Chappell. I had it happen many times through the years in Mansfield, where somebody would come in and they've got a gift or something they want to share. And I don't mean this in a condescending way, but they don't really know where they're at. I don't mean because it's so much higher than them. It could be. That's not my point of saying that, though. But it's just like going to someone's house. If I go into someone's house, I don't know where I'm at if I've never been there before. I don't go wandering through their house, opening their cupboards and stuff. You have to have enough sense to realize. And so sometimes people don't know where they're at, and they start wandering through the house and moving the furniture around, and you don't need to be moving someone else's furniture around. And so we have to be aware of those things on both extremes. So there are sometimes there'll be issues that we'll have to discuss, which isn't what's on my mind today. The only issue is that I'd like to see our brothers who have a ministerial background who've been in the church, and we've got a few of them from Africa and from Haiti both that are struggling right now with work and other things that are really keeping them from being able to be here as regularly as I'd like. And they need to be here. And we need them to be here. So that's a concern I want you praying about. Another thing would be updates on the progress of what's going on with our ministerial work, which I kind of touched on before. I didn't want to put that on something recorded, but there's a lot going on. There's more going on than I could tell you sitting here in a couple of hours. And some of it's so encouraging. It would just absolutely amaze you. Never seen anything like what's going on right now. You know, sometimes you can get in your own head and you're judging a condition subjectively, you know, meaning you're seeing it through your own eyes. And so, of course, to you, it may seem worse or better because you want it to be better or you think it's worse, depending on what kind of temperament you have. The things that are going on are not just things that I'm seeing and I'm thinking, wow, something's really happening. Something's happening in a powerful way. People are coming to me. Ministers are coming to me and saying, this is what's going on and where this church here has reached and the impact it's having and the changes in people's lives that are occurring far, far beyond the boundaries of the state of Ohio. So I'm thankful for that. So that'll be my praise report. But the point is, when we have these meetings, one of the things we want to do is if there's issues, and I will ask you here in a moment, if there's any concerns or things you think we need to be aware of as a group of men who are leading in the spiritual elements of the church, you can bring those up. Most of the time, like if we had some of our other pastors here, which we will in the future, some in Ohio will be coming, but some in other areas, more and more are starting to say they want to come. So maybe they'll be able to come to some of these meetings, so we'll start to see a lot more pastors coming that are ones we work with. You'll get to meet some ones you didn't even know we were working with, which might be exciting. But that type of conversation, like Brother Chappell and I have conversations regularly about things going on in the churches, those aren't things we necessarily want to have as a group. They may involve personal issues and other things, but I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about things relative to the corporate work of this church. If there's things you want to talk about, or for that matter, as I said, praise reports. And then most of these times, especially if we have some of our newer brothers, I do want to get into things like ministerial order and ministerial etiquette and how the operation of the ministry works from just a practical, hands-on standpoint. Most of what I would imagine most of you have learned through the years, especially our older brethren, our more senior brethren, has been learned from watching, some from doing. You observe how people take a service. Maybe if you haven't taken a service and you take a service, you may be going through the order you've watched. You're doing things the way someone else has done. That's highly appropriate. But I also want you to know why we do things the way we do. I think you all know by now just how important it is to me, the why. That's been controversial at the ministerial level. There are some who feel anxious about being asked why. They don't want to be asked why. They feel like my telling you that this is how we do it is good enough. But I don't feel that's good enough. I think we need whys for our wherefore. We need whys for what we're doing. And that's another area I was highly encouraged by at this camp meeting. Every time I had an opportunity between services to talk to people, somebody during that time was talking to me about how they've been feeling this burden that we have got to be able to tell people why. Some pretty senior brothers, some brothers that are younger brothers, but a wide range of brothers were said, we're getting to a point where we have got to do better at telling why. And then for that matter, how? How do we do this? Why are we doing it and how do we do it? Those are really important things. So I do want to talk about some of the practical elements that some of our older brethren, or ones that have been pastors or are pastors, will already know some of this pretty well, and I hope you can be patient with us if we talk about some of the practical elements. But some of the practical elements of how to operate in a service and why we do things the way we do. See, there's the how and the why. Would be really helpful. It'd be helpful to you because it'll help you to have a little more confidence. Not that any of you haven't shown confidence. Every one of you taking a service have done great. And I want all of you to take services at some point. But every one of you that have done it have done well. But I want you to be confident. I don't mean arrogant. There's a vast gulf between arrogance and confidence. Confidence is based on the right things, isn't it? Arrogance is based on the wrong things. I have absolutely complete confidence in my calling. This is going to sound a little big, what I'm about to say, but just listen through. I have absolute and complete confidence in the weight of my calling and in the knowledge God's given me. Notice how I just worded the last. Because he can take it back anytime he wants. It's all at his mercy. I don't have arrogance about anything I know or arrogance about something I'm able to do. But I have confidence because God stood behind me and given me the ability to do things that I know without him I could not do. And so there's a vast gulf between confidence and arrogance. I need you all to be confident, but not arrogant. No swaggering. Nobody's doing that, all right? This is preemptive. My word is probably one of my favorite words in the dictionary. Preemptive. Because it's one of the most important words. You take care of the business ahead of time. You make your decisions ahead of time. You make your commitments ahead of time. You make your covenants ahead of time, all those different types of things. And when the time comes that it's tested, you already know what you're doing. I already knew when I got married what I was going to do if somebody approached me in some inappropriate way. I already knew. I already decided what I was going to do. Probably because I was wild as a March hare when I was a teenager, but I didn't give it any thought when I was a teenager, when I was young. But the time I got married, the seriousness of that covenant, I started thinking through, how am I going to handle myself if this happens, and if that happens, and if I'm put in this environment? By the way, some environments don't let yourself get put in. Mm-hmm. That's extremely important for you brothers. I talk about it about every time, too, because it's critically necessary. And it is necessary for our newer brothers. I mean, newer to our church. But you don't just guard your heart. I think all of us know that it isn't usually our emotions that are the first things that are instigated. But you do have to guard your emotions because you get too close to somebody in an emotional relationship with somebody, you're going to be in trouble. Ladies tend to be more impacted by that than men quicker. Men get more impacted by physical and visual things. You have to guard your eyes. You got to guard your heart. I watched a minister one time that I have the highest respect for, that everyone in this room knows. I watched him in an environment where a lot of nastiness was going on. He and I were both in that environment. We had to be there for this big graduation ceremony that was going on. We were there to support this person who was graduating, but there was a lot of foul stuff going on around us. Passing by us, walking past. I intentionally watched this person. I wasn't suspicious of them. I didn't think they were going to be looking at people in the wrong way. But I watched how they handled someone walking by, how their eyes never focused on it. They didn't even lock on for a second and follow them as there was some lewd stuff. They wouldn't even let their eyes lock on it. In fact, a lot of times they would just look like that. They saw someone coming, they just looked down. You don't even need to look. We have to guard our eyes. We have to guard all of our senses against those kind of things, because one of the first things that will absolutely demolish our forward momentum is a loss of integrity at leadership, at any level of leadership. I have zero plan to lose my integrity. I've already made those commitments. But brethren, if one of you lose your integrity, it's going to impact all of us. If you can't hold your integrity, it's going to impact all of us. So that's critical. I'm jumping around because I've got a lot to say on all these things, but that's a pretty important thing. So purity, being a clean individual, we need a clean ministry. The thing that has done more damage to this body than anything in its history has been immorality in the ministry. There's nothing. Sometimes people get caught up in, I'm sorry, but a fad of the moment, some way that someone is presenting themselves, and they make that their hobby horse. That's the hill they're wanting to die on, is some specific, unique standard or something that they think is going to just absolutely tear the whole house down. If somebody does it different than they do, something they think is going to tear the house down, they put all their focus on. But if you look back at the history of our body, and by the way, look back at the history of much of Christendom, nothing has done more damage, not even close. If you were to rate what's done the most damage to the church, nothing has damaged the church more than leadership who didn't hold their integrity. So what do you think we should be the most focused on? That's part of developing and training ministers, Brother Ferris, as you and I have talked about a few times, and sometimes we've traveled together. If you are concerned with what is going to damage this body the most, and our church locally the most, your highest priority should be a clean leadership. And if you're somebody who feels a responsibility to teach and to train leaders, what should your biggest message be? It's really important that you're studious. It's really important that you become what we sometimes refer to as scriptorians, which just means someone that knows a lot of scripture. They know the Bible. It's very important that you are able to work effectively in a way that can reach the people. And I don't mean by that you take public speaking courses, because you won't need that if God anoints you. But if God anoints you and you're able to reach the hearts of the people, those are all really powerful things. But we've seen plenty of men who could quote scripture all day long, teach every doctrine there is, and they could move the whole crowd to thundering ovations, who did not keep their life clean, destroyed their ministry, and then ended up bringing a lot of people down with them. So what do you think the most important thing is? You see how simple it is? There's another more subtle thing that goes along with it. That more subtle element is your spirit. You've got to keep your mind and body clean, but you've got to have the right spirit too. Because I've watched people destroy entire churches that way, or at least destroy everybody in that church that was blind enough to keep following that blind man, because they were so concerned about following the leader, so to speak, that they did not have the courage to actually look at the leader and determine if they were worthy of being followed. If you're going to follow somebody, it needs to be somebody that's worthy of being followed. I don't mean they never make a mistake. No human leader in this present day is going to be beyond making mistakes. Believe me, I've made plenty. The key is we have to be able to learn from them, and they can't be existentially destructive mistakes, meaning they just destroy you. You're done in the ministry or whatever. You can't make those level of mistakes. That's not a mistake. If you do something that destroys your ministry, it was a choice. You didn't fall into it. It wasn't a mistake. You chose to do it. That's what I'm talking about, guarding your heart against. But in terms of other things, you can just have the wrong spirit. You can be full of arrogance. You can be full of a critical spirit, an angry spirit. There's so many different kind of negative spirits you can have that will impact your ministry. And you may have all the gifts in the world. Maybe you hold your integrity, but you're so foul-spirited that you pass that foul spirit on to others, and then you generationally curse them with your spirit. Because there are still generational curses. We can do it to our children. I've had to guard my heart I don't know how many times when things have happened that made me angry, and they have. Sometimes things that hurt me, and I don't mean like I was sitting crying in the corner, but I mean they hurt my soul, and it's hard sometimes to guard that from your children. If your children are around, they're seeing something's going on. But you can curse your children if you're not careful. If you get critical of things and you tear it down to them, and then you wonder why they don't love the Lord and they're not coming to church, you did it to them, the way you were talking around them, the example you showed to them. Now I'm talking about as a parent, but the same thing applies to those who are leaders. We can curse anybody who follows our example. One other thing I do want to talk about in each of these sessions is I do want us to get into a ministerial level study of a subject of some kind at a different level. And I think the best thing to start with would be the offices of the ministry, because it'll help us not only to recognize where we're at in time and what God is doing and working among us, but it'll also help us to recognize where our office might be if we are called to one of those offices. I want you all to be studious enough to recognize you could be more than that. That may be just part of your calling. I don't want you to be pigeonholed into, this is what I've been doing, so it's the only thing I can do. It's one of the things the Lord talked to me about very strongly when I was dying of cancer. At the oddest time to tell me something about my calling, as if there's future to it, I thought, well, this is a strange time to have this conversation, Lord, telling me about what my calling was when I felt like it was coming to its end. But one of the things that he talked to me about is what he intended me to do was more than what I have been doing. I'm trying to be very careful how I word it. But what I would probably be most known for was just part of my calling. So God can do that. He can give you multiple things that you are going to have in your life. So I don't want you to pigeonhole yourself. I also don't want you to be living in confusion. What do you want next, Lord? What do you want next? If you have a pretty clear idea of the path he wants for you in terms of the type of ministry he's called you to, it'll be a lot easier to prepare for it when he commissions you to it. Because there is obviously a gap between calling and commission. I've told this through the years, but the first time I had a really, and I don't know how young you were, Brother Chavel, because you and I were talking as teenagers about our calling when we sat together in those meetings. I'm not going to tell the story here, but the first time I really had a really dramatic, undeniable calling to the ministry was at 12 years of age. I was 32 years from pastoring. I didn't know that. I didn't even know what it would look like pastoring. I was still a very shy young boy. I thought, well, this is not what I'm going to be doing. I can't see myself speaking to people and doing all this. But it was 2 years from the time I got that first distinct call before I was pastoring a church. And I knew that pastoring a church was the next step, even though that wasn't the most clear step. As I was driving down to a meeting, one of the last things that happened when the Lord really was working on me, this was in my 20s, I was driving down to a meeting. I had Brother Mac Blanks with me, and I was driving, and he was sitting in the passenger seat. And he didn't know this happened because he wasn't looking at me at the time. We were praying and singing some songs, and Spirit had filled the car. I went out, and I don't mean speaking in tongues. I mean, I blacked out. It could have been a millisecond. It could have been several seconds. He didn't notice. But I was asking the Lord as we were singing and praying. I wasn't thinking of going into the ministry pastoring or anything. I had never taught a class at that point. I'd never taught a Sunday school here. This is literally a week before Brother Moore asked me to teach a Sunday school. I had no clue that was coming. And I was asking the Lord, what do you want me to do? I feel this constant pressure and pull. And I blacked out. When I blacked out, I had what I guess you'd call a vision. I passed out, and it was like someone turned a light on real fast in a dark room, and I saw myself standing behind a pulpit teaching, not standing behind a pulpit leading a service, standing behind a pulpit teaching. And then the light went out. My eyes opened. And I thought, I don't know what that means because I'm not interested in teaching, you know. Literally a week later, Brother Moore came up to me and said, would you think about teaching a class in the Sunday school? You see, the Lord, when it's time for him to start moving, he'll make things really clear to you. You don't have to worry he's not going to make it clear if you're looking. You have to hunger after it. I don't mean hunger for a position, but you've got to have a hunger to work for the Lord is what it comes down to. Working for the Lord could be behind the scenes and no one sees you. In fact, that's usually the first levels of work for the Lord is where no one is noticing. Nobody is giving you credit. That's good. You don't need it. But you'll get plenty of it. I get more credit for things than I would probably be comfortable getting in terms of people calling me and reaching out to me. You'll get it if you work hard for the Lord, but that's not why you work. You don't work to get the credit. You work because the work needs done. And so usually, a lot of times, God will prepare you by putting you in these other positions, things like ushering or things like working around the property or other things where it's more of a, when you say menial, it sounds like it's a bad, dirty job, but it's just more of a service-oriented physical job. It's not in the spotlight. It's behind-the-scenes work. But that's the best place for God to prepare any leader because that's where he works out the need for you to be in the spotlight. You prove to him that you want to work for him without getting any credit, and he'll give you a job where you get lots of credit. But you have to first develop the right spirit where he knows that you're not doing it for the credit. But he'll give you those things. So I said one of the things I want to do is get into a ministerial study on the offices of the ministry, and I think that would be valuable for all of us. I don't expect anyone, when we do that, to declare their calling or do anything public, but I do want you to be studying. What do I feel pulled toward as we talk about these things? Is that something that I feel some burning in my bones when I talk about it? What would it look like? What would you have to do to prepare for that type of role if you feel that's the role God's calling you to? And then what does the real thing look like? We sometimes make this distinction and say there's teachers, but there's not yet the office of a teacher. I'm going to say something that I think will probably be shocking to maybe a couple of you in this room, maybe more than a couple, who knows? I'm not sure that's accurate. Again, because I think our definition of the office of a teacher is not biblical. We're thinking it means, like I said, something that is a flawless teacher that would never be wrong. They know every single thing in the Bible. I think we've already had people in some of these offices operating. Then we get a little uncomfortable with that too, and we'll say, the office is partially here. Maybe partially. But what would it look like if it was here fully? What are you expecting exactly? If someone had the office of a prophet, what would that look like? That's even simpler. You think they're going to be prophesying every service? Prophets in the Bible didn't. It seems to be prophesying every week. There's times prophets went on for a few months at a time, but if you study Haggai, for example, someone that went on pretty steady for a few months straight, that's about all the prophecy in the Bible that's recorded that he had. So you better think through what these offices really look like. I think sometimes we're looking for something that it might be here, some of it. And if we recognize that, we may be able to move a little further because we'll realize we can do this. I don't mean everything. I'm not going that far yet, but there's things I think we can do that we haven't realized we can do because we're looking for something that is unrealistic in terms of what it would look like.